Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into maritime terrorism and the ISPS code. Here's the one crucial idea you need to anchor this entire topic in your mind. Maritime terrorism literally forced global shipping law to shift from just reacting to crimes after they happen to building a proactive ironclad fortress to stop them entirely. We have a clear roadmap for today. We'll start by defining maritime terrorism, look at the historical maritime terror incidents, and examine the target vulnerability problem. Then, we'll break down the ISPS code framework, cover enforcement and state implementation, and wrap up with a synthesis and final recap.
All right, Section 1, Defining Maritime Terrorism and Maritime Threats. It's absolutely crucial we begin with a precise understanding of the exact problem we're trying to solve.
Before this framework existed, maritime law was almost entirely focused on punishing bad actors after an attack had already happened. But the sheer scale of modern threats demanded a massive paradigm shift. The law literally had to become a shield, rather than just a gavel.
Before we dive into the specific laws, let's just use plain English. If someone commits violence at sea to make a political point, rather than, say, trying to steal a wallet or hijack cargo for cash, the precise legal term we use is maritime terrorism. So the formal definition you need to learn is violence at sea or against maritime infrastructure for political or ideological ends. What's really fascinating here is how this contrasts with piracy. Piracy law strictly requires private ends, meaning the act is done purely for personal financial gain. So by definition, piracy law completely excludes political acts. That is exactly why the USWA Convention, which we've touched on previously, was built specifically to capture those political acts that piracy law leaves out. Moving into Section 2, Historical Maritime Terror Incidents and Escalating Threats. To understand why the law underwent such a radical change, we have to look at the historical attacks that exposed some massive vulnerabilities in global shipping. We're looking at a timeline that tracks the chronological escalation of maritime terror tactics, moving way beyond older historical events like the Achille Lauro. These three specific attacks in 2000, 2002, and 2008 led straight to a total regulatory overhaul. We're going to give each of these full treatment: the facts, the issue, and the vital lesson. First up is the USS Cole in the year 2000. Here are the facts. It was an Al-Qaeda suicide attack using an explosive-laden small boat against a U.S. Navy destroyer that was refueling an Aden, Yemen. The issue? It resulted in the tragic deaths of 17 U.S. sailors. So the crucial lesson here is that even a heavily defended military vessel is highly vulnerable to a cheap, asymmetric small boat attack. I mean, think about it. A multi-billion-dollar ship was crippled by a fiberglass boat. Fast forward to 2002 with the MV Limburg. Notice the exact same facts and method here. A French oil tanker attacked off the coast of Yemen using that exact same small boat method. But the issue and the lesson completely shift to economics. The attack caused a massive oil spill. The big lesson here is that maritime terrorism creates outsized economic leverage relative to the actual cost of the attack. That one cheap little boat measurably raised shipping insurance rates across the entire region. Finally, the 26/11 Mumbai attacks in 2008. The facts: terrorists hijacked a vessel to reach targets in Mumbai. The specific issue here is that the ship itself wasn't the target. Instead, the sea was weaponized as an infiltration route for a land-based attack. The lesson? Coastal security absolutely must be robust enough to prevent the maritime transit of land-based threats. Section 3, the target vulnerability problem, focusing on choke points and risks. So why are these attacks so devastatingly effective? And why is the ocean such an attractive target in the first place? Well, the plain truth is that global trade relies incredibly heavily on just 4 narrow choke points. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, and the Bab el-Mandeb. Disrupting just one of these causes economic damage that is wildly disproportionate to the attack's cost. Imagine closing a single lane on a busy highway at rush hour. Traffic backs up for miles, right? That is exactly the effect on global trade. Combine that with the fact that maritime security historically lagged far behind post-9/11 aviation security, and the sea basically became a comparatively soft target. Section 4, the ISPS Code Framework and Proactive Security. To close that massive vulnerability gap, the international community created a rapid, aviation-style security overhaul. The direct response to 9/11 required a totally new legal framework. The precise instrument they created is the ISPS code. That stands for the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code. Adopted in December 2002, It was injected directly as amendments into SOLAS Chapter XI2. It's structured into two parts. Part A is entirely mandatory, while Part B is recommendatory guidance. The core mechanic of the ISPS code is a three-tier maritime security level system. You can think of this kind of like the color-coded threat levels you see at an airport. But returning to the strict legal rule, the ISPS dictates Level 1 is for normal, minimum protective measures that have to be maintained at all times. Level 2 is for heightened risk, requiring additional measures. And Level 3 is for exceptional, specific measures when an incident is probable or imminent. Now, before you can protect a ship, you have to identify its weak points. In plain terms, you basically need a blueprint of your vulnerabilities. The precise legal term for this is a Ship Security Assessment, or SSA. This assessment directly forms the Mandatory Ship Security Plan, or SSP. The absolute rule here is that this plan must be approved by the flag state for any international vessel over 500 gross tonnage, as well as passenger ships and mobile offshore drilling units. Plainly speaking, someone at corporate headquarters needs to oversee security for the whole fleet, while someone else needs to enforce the rules on the actual boat. Formally defined, that shore-based executive is the company security officer, or CSO, and the person on board who is actively implementing the ship security plan is the ship security officer, or SSO. This beautifully illustrates the symmetry of the ISPS code. Every single security obligation required on the ship side has an exact parallel obligation required on the port side. So a ship security plan pairs perfectly with a port facility security plan, and a ship security officer pairs exactly with a port facility security officer. So how does a ship actually prove it's following the rules? Think of it like a commercial driver's license, but for international waters. The precise legal term is the ISSC, the International Ship Security Certificate, and it formally verifies SOLAS Chapter XI2 compliance. Additionally, when that ship interacts with a port, especially if they happen to be operating at different security levels, they must sign a documented agreement on exactly who is responsible for what. This specific, critical document is called a Declaration of Security, or DOS. Section 5, Enforcement and State Implementation. Because, let's be real, rules on paper mean absolutely nothing without some serious teeth in the real world. Enforcement relies heavily on port state control. A port state has the absolute legal power to deny entry, delay, detain, or outright expel any ship that's lacking a valid ISSC. Because SOLAS is mandatory, ISPS compliance is a completely non-negotiable precondition for participating in international trade. If we look at specific state implementation, India delivers this through its Merchant Shipping Act and DG shipping circulars. And following those 2611 Mumbai attacks, this was reinforced with extreme urgency, ensuring that major Indian ports maintain strictly approved port facility security plans. All right, let's move into our final section, Section 6, Synthesis and Final Recap, focusing on the legal landscape. Let's see how every single thing we've studied today comes together. This is the ultimate synthesis of our legal regimes. When you evaluate the true nature of these laws side by side, piracy targets private ends, and the USA Convention targets political motives. But both of those are fundamentally reactive, punitive laws. They are invoked only after an attack has already occurred. The ISPS code, on the other hand, is the proactive, preventive regulatory layer. It uses strict risk assessment and access control to sit right in front of both of those laws, effectively stopping the attack before it ever happens. To firmly lock this all in, here is our master recap of every doctrine we covered today, in exact teaching order. We defined maritime terrorism as acts for political ends. We learned from the Cole, the Limburg, and Mumbai about asymmetric vulnerability and massive economic leverage. We unpacked the ISPS code under SOLAS Chapter 11-2, detailing its mandatory Part A and its three-tier security levels. We defined the critical roles and plans, the SSP based on the SSA, managed by the CSO, SSO, and PFSO. We noted that the ISSC and DOS act as the paperwork proven compliance, enforced fiercely by port state control. And finally, we synthesized that ISPS is proactive, unlike reactive piracy laws. Take a moment to really review this, and as you do, ask yourself this final question. As drones and cyber attacks continue to redefine the very nature of violence at sea, how will these proactive legal tools need to evolve to stop tomorrow's maritime threats?